Amazing colleague and Robofun mentor and teacher for us, Lianne Remen. How are you, Lianne?
Doing pretty well. Staying cool.
Cool. That's cool, and that's very important. We have been incredibly fortunate to have Lianne with us for the last few years as a mentor, as she has gotten her degree from the Columbia School of Public Policy. Did I get that right?
There's a longer name for it, but yeah, it's the public policy school. Yeah.
Okay. And she is now a policy analyst trying to understand poverty, something that I deeply care about. And I'm very proud of what she's doing, and very, very fortunate that she has learned Python and is teaching our Python classes along with other mentors of ours. And so Lianne and I are going to talk about what's going on in Python. What are we doing? Before we get started on that, I'm going to give you a few pieces of information about Robofun for those of you in our audience who are not familiar. Robofun is a company that is now 24 and a half years old. We're located on the Upper West Side of Manhattan at 102nd and Broadway. And right now we are knee deep into our summer camp. And summer camp lasts for 12 weeks of the summer. I believe we have 4 more to go, something like that. And if you're interested, you register your child for mornings, for afternoons, or for the full day. And we have programs for 3 to 13-year-olds. And we've been doing this for 22 summers. And our biggest goal is to have kids really love what they're doing. They are learning. We believe that they learn more and they absorb more and are engaged if they're having fun. So we work really hard for that. So if you're interested, check out robofun.org. And if you like what you're hearing, please use all of the vehicles in your social media feeds to give us likes, because that really helps. And my social media people constantly bug me to say that, so I want to say it. And what we're going to talk about today is what happens in our Python classes. And before we get into that, Lianne, tell me a bit about yourself. How did you come to us? And tell us a little bit about your history, where you grew up, where you went to college.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. On my journey to the Upper West Side and the journey to Robofun was a bit roundabout. I'm originally from California. My first jobs were always in, babysitting, working summer camp, that kind of thing. I went to college in Southern California, where I took my first Python class. So that was my first exposure to coding in general.
Yep.
And worked for several years in community engagement and advocacy at in various settings. So I worked for the state legislature in California. I worked for AmeriCorps, for the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. And I was an educator in many different classroom settings, in many different states. And when I started to apply to grad school, because after all that community engagement work, I started to become more interested about the numbers, the data, and knew I wanted to pursue my master's degree. And Robofun just seemed like the perfect fit. When I moved here, I was job searching as something to do part-time while I was in school. And the combination of STEM, but also keeping it really fun and approachable for, elementary age students, which is what I primarily, the age range that I primarily worked with. It was great. And now that there is this Python class that has been kind of been launched in the last year or so, it's been a great opportunity to kind of blend what I already knew and bring it to my students in the Robofun context. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So we feel like we have a wonderful marriage of somebody. Many of our mentors are part-time graduate students, and we feel very fortunate. And given your background as a camp counselor, as a working with kids in many different contexts, whenever I walk through your classrooms, I can see, okay, this is somebody who not only knows how to manage a classroom, but likes children. And that for me is very, very important. So So Lianne, you learned Python somewhat in a college programming class, and then you've been doing more Python in your graduate work, right?
Yes, yes.
And
So yeah,
go
that
ahead.
was my first exposure. And at the time, I'm just an undergrad. I've never taken any kind of coding before, and I completed the class, and I think it's useful as far as like just logical thinking skills, and it complemented some of my like philosophy coursework at the time. It was very, it was challenging at the time, but I got through it, and but it wasn't until I sort of became more interested in data, how to do data analysis and program analysis, that at Columbia, I picked up a few other programming languages, Stata and R, and these things, they all kind of, even though they're all different and the syntax is different in every language, they learning one helps me learn another.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of unlocking different levels from there. But that's what I love to kind of bring to my students is, this is so much more useful outside of just like the input and output,
Right.
doing simple tasks. Yeah.
Right. So then I worked all spring with some of our mentors to develop this curriculum. And then this summer we have unleashed it to our children, although we practiced various parts of it all spring long. Tell us how your weeks of teaching have gone. What have you noticed? So you're teaching 5th through 8th graders. I apologize that my dog is whimpering.
Good.
He'll figure it out soon.
Yeah. I would say it really varies for sure. It depends on the grade that the student has just completed. But then it's not just age and grade, but also personality of the student, what they like and dislike within each chapter that we get through, or lesson that we get through. I really, in a single week, or sometimes there are private lessons where we do a series of 5. I really try to tailor around what the student is most interested in. So some students are incredibly visual. They love using the turtle package in Python, and we can customize shapes, colors. We pull up like a whole diagram of the hex codes, and they love being able to like, I want the lilac color, I want the seafoam green, and that's like what really excites them, and they know how to piece it together after I show them like the basics. Um, Other students love like different aspects, like logical loops and the if then, and if then is in Scratch coding, but it's if else in Python. And they love to just kind of they take the assignment, which we start with sort of a make your own adventure story,
Yep.
and they take off with that. They love writing. They can really combine the string class type and the defining their own variables, and just piece that together, and they come up with some really creative, very long stories that when they're showing you, you're like, okay, this looks like a 5 to 10 minute story, but no, I'm really fascinated by the different parts of the lesson that different students like latch onto.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Um, so would you say, what would you say to a parent that is considering putting their child in a Python class? Do you think that what do you think they're learning? And how is it going to help other aspects of their life?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I recommend it for any student that has already seen X and Y axis in school. So if you're already sort of at that level where you're using coordinates and you understand the negative and positive values of X and Y, any level around there and beyond is great to start incorporating some Python, just some easy coding skills into their conception of the world and of computers and technology. Um, Even though they're not, I mean, coding is not like a standard class in
Right.
like ed.
I'm just going to jump in and say,
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 24 years. Whatever they're learning now, some parts of it, the underlying concepts will apply, but there may not be a Python in the same way in 5 to 10 years. So some of my parents are like, well, they have to learn X, Y, Z. And I'm like, maybe they need to learn the concepts because it's all going to change. So, yeah.
It's true. Like languages, there many more languages might pop up, but it's the muscle that you build that overlaps with so many other things. Like it's your ability to use logic or to understand like the basic input output. In coding, you have to be specific and you have to be detail oriented to understand like, okay, why didn't this show what I wanted it to show? Why didn't it ask what I wanted it to ask? And you have to say, okay, well, let's start getting into the nitty gritty. Where's the space? Is there an accidental space and there's an accidental colon? Like even coders at the youngest to the oldest age spectrum, they all deal with the same, like line by line going through where did I maybe make a mistake? It's not just the logic skills or the detail oriented like practice. It's also just general life skills, dedication, patience, staying focused. Yeah, it's so many things that it's helpful to have. Yeah, I couldn't speak more positively about the benefits of coding for young students.
You had mentioned in our practice session how at Columbia, when you started to work with your fellow students, and some of them had never had a Python class, and you had, how much easier it was for you. And they're like, oh my, what about, and you're like, what? No, we can do this.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's true. I think the same way that it was easier for me to learn Stata and R after already having some Python experience, if you're just entering Stata with no concept of the console, the terminal, what the output might be, it's just so the learning curve, as I was telling you, is just, it's so steep. It can be really discouraging if you're just being given, we were being given commands to perform like homework tasks, but there's no replacement for prior practice and just familiarity. So some students were getting like a major crash course in just like how to use coding in general, and some were able to more easily just take it, start manipulating, start testing, like, oh, that didn't work. Like, let me look up what we call the documentation for different commands. And it makes your life and your homework like a little bit easier if you can just think, okay, this command is not giving me what I want. Let me take a step back. I wanted to actually summarize this piece and give me like top 3. And the logic of doing that is just so much faster if you've seen it before. Yeah.
Not only seen it before, but I think really seen it before maybe 11, 12, 13. I mean, it's the same thing with learning languages. I mean, I have 3 nephews that are completely fluent in Spanish, and I'm both so happy for them and a little envious because I'm learning Spanish now, and it's just like, oh, why,
Yeah.
And this is another kind of language, but learning it young, it just, your brain is much more flexible and much more capable.
Yes, so, I 100% agree. Yeah.
So that's good. So tell us a little bit about what your poverty work, because it's very, very interesting what you want to do, and I think my audience would love to hear that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I mentioned, through a variety of different work experiences, I've been able to, learn from different communities and different community leaders about what their top struggles are and maybe where they would like to see improvement. We want to see more students go to college. We want to see more like after school programming for our youngest students or students whose parents can't be there 24/7. It's only when, I'm able to like learn in these types of settings that I know more can be done. And so that's where I became more interested in data analysis and went to Columbia to do that. I think that part of my focus, I'm more of a generalist. I know some people have like specific issue areas that they work in, like health and the pandemic recovery, or like building financial literacy and really working in that realm. I'm really open to the kind of work that I would be doing, and I obviously there's no one area that will solve it all,
Right.
but that's really like what motivates my anti-poverty data work.
Uh-huh.
Um, I'd love to be able to continue advocating, being able to show, hey, I crunched these numbers, and I know that we designed the study this way, and so it's pretty solid. We can prove X caused Y, and that's why we need to go with, A, B, and C best practices or preferred practices. There's no simple solution, but I hope that kind of outlines the
Well,
outlines.
our world very much needs the work that you're going to set off and do. And you've just graduated, is that right?
Yes, just graduated, so still pursuing this work. I also, with a friend, am working on a startup for sustainable
Ah,
cultural clothing, and I have a few irons in the fire at the minute.
yep,
I think post grad landing
yep.
spot had multiple things I wanted to do, and I started just doing all of them. So yeah.
Well, we hope you keep teaching with Robofun because you're doing amazing things. And to close our interview today, do you have any stories that come to mind of a child that was just eating this up and was just a blast to teach? Because I know from the point of view of teaching, when you find a way into understanding where a child is at and move them to the next stage, it's
Mhm.
very, very meaningful.
Yeah. I actually, this summer I was teaching Python, and I had two students, and they were both like incredible. They had this amazing imagination. I think they both um, did a lot of like recreational reading, fantasy related reading, and as I mentioned earlier, um, one of the one of the things that students latch onto is like the storytelling aspect. So they both had an incredible command by the end of how to use strings in storytelling. And so we did a Mad Libs and we did a choose your own adventure type story. And in both situations, I had allotted a certain amount of time for that section of the lesson, and they just wanted more time. Their free time, they wanted to do just that. They were like, I'm going to go back to my choose your own adventure. And it was just like, they both ended up with quite long, like very detailed stories. This a strange man in a like a tan coat with the hat like tilted that covered his eyes, and it just went on and on. The detail was like amazing. And I think when you can incorporate a student's like love for whatever it is,
Yeah.
and you blend it with Python, they just like go on and on and on. They're like, great, now I'll use if, and they'll like choose from three things. And it was when you teach a student how to do something like use if else,
Yeah.
and you okay, let's exercise. Okay, if it's raining outside, then print I won't go outside. But
Right.
when they use the simple like mechanism to create just like their own world and use it well, like it's just so impressive. They just have such like expansive minds.
Yes. Yes. The other day at dismissal, I heard a child crying, and I got a little worried. And Noah was like, "It's okay. He doesn't want to go home."
Yeah.
I was like, "Okay, my child was that way also. When he found something he loved, the transition to something else." But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wasn't happy that he was crying, but I was happy that he was crying because he was having such a good time.
Yeah.
So
After teaching a lot this summer, I think there have been several. I've been witness to a few instances of like full on possible meltdown, but sort of like what happened and what can we do? And it was just I don't want to leave. Like I'm not leaving. I'm staying here. Like
yes,
all these things. I'm like that's That's fantastic.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's a hard moment as a parent, and a lot of what we do, I believe, and I'm not sure about this with Trinket, can they keep working on these at home? Or
Yes.
okay,
When students take our Python classes, they make their own Trinket account,
okay,
and we have them write down an email, maybe mom or dad or parent guardian's email, and
sure.
write down their password so that they can take it home and they can log in themselves. Yeah.
Yep. I remember this when I was a very new teacher, and I would have kids who would go home and they would do nothing else between the end, hopefully they'd eat and sleep, but they would come back with huge amounts of work done. And it was very gratifying. So,
Yeah.
um, so Lianne, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and thank you so much for your dedication to our programs. I remember over the middle of the pandemic, like dropping off an iPad for you at home, and
Yeah.
uh, we are very lucky to have you with us, and I also very much wish you the best in your your job search in policy analysis. So,
Thank
all
you.
right. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for our audience today.